I request all of you to give him a big hand first of all. There is some atmosphere for his talk.
Basically, my approach is that, I'll give you some basic assumptions that I'm making for this, and then go on to what my aim for today is, followed by, sort of a historical background, and then end up with something vis-a-vis the impact. My basic assumptions for the discussion are this. One is that, I mean, it seems almost contradictory, but although we are talking about the economic corridor, my interest is more the political aspects of the impact. And this because for now, almost 200 years, 250 years, we've been talking mostly about economics and not enough about politics. And this is my basic thesis for understanding history today, is that that needs to be stressed. It happened because in the 1750s, there was a man named Adam Smith who put forth an idea, and the idea was that trade will give familiarity, will give then a way to wars, and there'd be no clashes. And of course, we know that that hasn't happened for some reason. Then came Karl Marx, who said not only that, but because people are going to be competitive given the Industrial Revolution, which was happening about that time, about 100 years almost exactly after Adam Smith. And he said because of the surplus, there'd be wars. And we know there have been wars. And then came along somebody by the name of Max Weber, who diverged from the economic and gave a sociological explanation. And the sociological explanation, which was early in the 20th century, late 19th century, was that, listen, Europe is superior by virtue of its work ethic. And it might be interesting for you to know what he concluded regarding the East and Asia as a whole. He said that Confucianism is rational but inactive, that Islam is active but irrational, and Hinduism is both inactive and irrational. And that was his explanation for why the West should dominate the world. And we know where that went as well, and that's where the colonial idea of manifest destiny came up. My stress throughout my studies, and as a result of many wonderful professors whom I worked with, has been that it is still the history of states and still the history of empires that we must grasp, because that's where the power lies. Economics, money, may be one of the sources of power, but at the end of the day, power lies with states and empires, and that's what we need to pay attention to, and which is what I've sort of spent my career trying to look at the historical, in the historical sort of frame, is that the political history of these areas. As far as CPEC goes, if there is an impact on J&K, it will not be because of Delhi or Islamabad. I can tell you that. It will not be because their sort of concentrations are territorial possessiveness, and basically national egos. Nor is it going to be Indians and Pakistanis, because whether you like it or not, most Indians don't really care about Kashmir. As long as their bottom line, personal bottom lines are good, and everything is happening fine. Whatever the army is doing over here, whatever everybody else is doing, they don't care. And in Pakistan, they don't know, frankly. I mean, they've been so inured, so habituated into listening about something, they say, all right, we'll just support, about 12 years ago, this was only 12 years ago, when I first went to Pakistan, I was quite surprised when somebody said, oh, so you're not allowed to pray in Kashmir. Is that true? And this was somebody who was fairly well educated and knew about J&K and the issue. And when I said, no, that's a lie. I mean, we have problems, but that's not one of the problems. And he was completely taken aback. You know, and we had an argument. So people don't know, you know. So who is it going to be? It's going to have to be us. We, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the peoples, are going to have to define what it is and how it is that CPEC is going to influence us, is going to affect us, is going to impact us. And I know, I mean, I was just in Delhi, and somebody else, you know, sort of, following a discussion that we had, was saying, yeah, I agree that we have to have, and somebody responded that, you know, it is J&K where the solution is going to be found. And they said, how's J&K going to do it? You know, you're divided, you're this, that, and I held my tongue at the time because I got angry, as usual. You know, but, you know, it was there. The feeling is that we can't do it. And just for that, I think we need to demonstrate that we can. You know, it's very simple. So I think that that is something, those are sort of the key sort of basic assumptions that I make in my sort of what I go forward with. My aim today will be to frame the CPEC initiative in sort of two ways. One is by asking the question, where are we in space, that is, in geography? And that's the first question. Here, I ask you to just close your eyes and imagine the map of J&K. And if you look at it in your mind's eye, you will see that we are on the periphery of South Asia, and we are on the periphery of Central Eurasia. We are sort of right there in between. And when I say we, I'm talking about Gilgit, Baltistan, Ladakh, and Kashmir. And because it is geography, we've always been there, you know, and we've had approximately 1,300 years of known history, where Gilgit, Baltistan, and Ladakh have been the seam of this fault line, if you will. And Kashmir has been sort of the vortex, at times crucible, and at times cauldron, like today. You know, it has been. And this is what we have to understand if we are going to impact and know where to go with an idea like CPEC. And it's an idea. You know, where it's going to go, we don't know. I think there are problems with it, but I'll come back to it a little bit later. So given the erstwhile state of J&K's position in geography, what I feel we need to do is to take it out of the India-Pakistan paradigm. Because my belief is that these next 100 years or so, these two countries are still going to be maturing. You know, and we need to take it out of that paradigm, and we need to put it into the paradigm of Central Asia and South Asia, and see what happens. You know, if you again close your eyes and you imagine what happens when we do that, it's very easy. The economy of Kashmir is closer to the economy of Kashgar than it is to the economy of a Jammu or even a Lahore. And it's for a very good reason, because of various, you know, cultural, linguistic, and other connections that we've had. And just to take, you know, again, I always say, look at a map. You know, it's very important. When you look at a map, you see the proximity of Kashmir to Central Asia and Kashmir to South Asia in terms of centralities. You know, and a few years ago, I was in Tashkent, I think about 10, 12 years ago. So this is figures from 10 or 12 years ago. And I found out that they grew approximately 300,000 tons of fruit every year. 100,000 tons they ate. You know, another 100,000 tons they would export. And the other remaining 100,000 tons would sit on the ground and rot because it had nowhere to go. You know, and I immediately thought, what if they flew it to Kashmir, you know, in this day and age? And we started a food technology place at Islamic University, and started to can these fruits, started to do things with these fruits, that where it would have a longer longevity, and it would transform our economy. The reason it doesn't happen is political, right? I don't think there's any other reason that it doesn't happen. So therefore, if you really look at what is happening in the world today, you will see that this thing that they call globalization is threatening the status quo nation states. It's rocking them from their very foundations. And so they wanted to slow down. They wanted not to speed up as we would like to speed it up. And we would like to speed it up because precisely we are borderland peoples. We know what it means to be globalized. We know what it means to take from what is in the south and what is in the north and mix it up and create something, what is in the east and what is in the west and create something. And I think that is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to not only be aware of, but push so that, we can realize benefits from it. Where are we in time? In other words, historically, on this CPEC issue. Historically, and by that I don't mean our local histories, what I mean is rather the regional history, and even go so far as to say even world history. This because we've always been connected with the world, and our disconnection has only been in the last 150 to 200 years. 200 years or so. It's been sort of this because of the role of empires and colonies in not wanting their borders, to be open, as they have been in historical time. So rising Russian, British, French, and Portuguese. Now, very often people will stop at that, but there were other empires as well. There was the Ottoman, there was the Safavid, there was the Mughal, and there was the Qing Empire in China. So these were empires on the rise during these 200 years. And the speed with which they grew was very, very fast, and more or less took over the world. The only advantage that the Europeans had was that they became a seafaring empire and began trading through the seas. As a result of which, the interior of what is known as the Eurasian landmass, or Inner Asia, dried up, and there was no trade there. As a result of which, in the mid-19th century, 1850s to 1940s and 50s, the Europeans dominated. Their empires flourished, and the other ones, the Asian ones, including the Qing, started to decline. And as a result of which, by the time the early 20th century, you can always say 1940s rolled around, you had a huge colonial empire, or I should say colonial empires, and mostly European, and at the end of which was aided and abetted, so to speak, by what I said, Max Weber's earlier, European superiority, because of the Protestant work ethic idea, and which translated in political terms as manifest destiny, and as a result of which, but all empires have their limits, and they reached that limit around the 1940s. And as I said, it started unraveling in the First World War, after the First World War. But by the 1940s, it had completely unraveled. And of course, colonial empires collapsed. And we saw the birth of something else in the next 50 years, 1950, say, to 1990, which was something called the Cold War regime, which was basically two large empires, one the US, the other the Soviet Union, into which we also fell, into the cracks of which we also fell. I'm not going to repeat that history, it's very well known. So we have two empires. I think the most critical moment that has happened in the recent past is 1990 and the collapse of that Cold War regime. What has happened with the collapse of the Cold War regime is that that world order obviously didn't work for whatever reason, and we are now, and I believe still, searching for a new world order, and that is, I think, where the opportunity for us and people like us lies, like the Soviet collapse, like what seems to be the European collapse. These things are happening, and it's just historical trend. And I would say that that's what we need to do. This is not nostalgic, hopeful thinking. It's just, this is an objective study of history, seems to demonstrate. There are some negatives, and I'll close with this. With this whole CPEC idea, per se, or OBOR for that, from that point of view, such as one belt, one road. And the weak point there is that they all seem to sort of, if you can imagine a pipeline, so this, the CPEC is essentially from Kashmir to Badr, So if you make a pipe from Kashmir to Badr, even though they may go through Gilgit-Baltistan, I'm not quite sure how Gilgit and Baltistan are going to benefit from it, or whether Badr is going to benefit from it, frankly. And the sincerity of this is only stressed if we follow it to its logical progression. Logical progression being that will it go from Kashmir also to Leh, from Kashmir to Yarkand to Leh to Srinagar. If that happens, then yes. But if it's a pipeline, I'm not so sure I want to touch it. Because it doesn't benefit the people along the way. Or for that, whether even in Badr it will sort of be helping Balochistan. It's a question mark that needs to be asked. There's Yarkand, Leh, Srinagar, there's Kashmir, Gilgit, Srinagar. These are traditional routes, and these are things that we have to pay attention to. So I think that this is what I want to leave you with. Obviously, my time is up. So I'll leave you with this. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Siddiq Wahid.